The rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring the headlights of James Carver's sleek black Mercedes as it tore down the winding coastal highway. At 42, James was the epitome of success, a tech mogul whose company, Carver Innovations, dominated Silicon Valley with its cutting-edge AI solutions. His face graced Forbes covers, his name synonymous with ambition. Tonight, he was driving to a high-stakes meeting in Portland, Oregon, to seal a billion-dollar merger. Time was money, and James had no patience for delays. The storm worsened, wind howling like a banshee. His phone buzzed with emails, and he glanced at it, cursing the spotty signal. That split-second distraction was all it took. A sharp curve loomed ahead, and the car skidded on the slick asphalt. James yanked the wheel, but it was too late. The Mercedes crashed through the guardrail, plunging into the icy, swollen Columbia River below. The shock of cold water jolted him awake as the car sank. His chest tightened, lungs screaming for air. He clawed at the seatbelt, fingers numb until it finally gave way. Kicking free of the wreckage, he surfaced, gasping, only to be swept away by the river's merciless current. For what felt like hours, he fought to stay afloat, debris battering his body. His strength waned, and darkness crept into his vision. This was it, he thought, the end of James Carver. But fate had other plans. The current weakened as the river widened, depositing him on a muddy bank. He coughed violently, vomiting water, his body shivering uncontrollably. His suit was torn, his Rolex gone, his wallet lost to the depths. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and every muscle ached. He had no idea where he was, only that he was alive, barely. Stumbling through the pre-dawn mist, James reached a road that led to the outskirts of a small city. Neon signs flickered in the distance, and the faint hum of traffic reached his ears. It was Astoria, Oregon, a quaint working-class town far removed from the glittering towers of San Francisco. Exhausted, he collapsed near a bus stop, his vision blurring. Passers-by hurried past, their umbrellas shielding them from the drizzle and his misery. To them, he was just another vagrant, unworthy of a second glance. As dawn broke, an old man approached, his steps slow and deliberate. He wore a tattered coat, its patches barely holding together, and a knit cap pulled low over his grizzled face. His name was Amos, though James wouldn't learn that until later. Amos had lived on Astoria's streets for decades, surviving on odd jobs and the kindness of strangers. His worldly possessions fit in a battered backpack, and his only companion was a stray dog named Rusty, who trotted faithfully at his side. Amos knelt beside James, his weathered hands gentle as he checked for signs of life. "Hey, fella, you still with us?" he rasped, his voice rough but kind. James stirred, muttering incoherently. Amos noticed the gash and the blue tinge to James's lips. Without hesitation, he pulled off his coat and draped it over James, ignoring the chill that bit into his own bones. Rusty whined, nudging James's hand. "Come on, let's get you warm," Amos said, helping James to his feet. Supporting the younger man's weight, he led him to a nearby alley where a makeshift shelter, cardboard and tarps, offered some protection. Amos sat James down on a crate and rummaged through his backpack. He produced a thermos of weak coffee and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. "Eat," he urged, pressing the food into James's trembling hands. James, barely conscious, took a bite. The bread was stale, but it was the first warmth he'd felt in hours. Amos watched him, his eyes crinkling with quiet concern. "You got a name, son?" he asked. "James," he croaked. "James Carver." "Well, James, you're lucky to be breathing. That river don't give many second chances." Amos paused, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $20 bill, his last earnings from collecting cans. He pressed it into James's hand. "Take this. Get yourself a hot meal or a bus ticket. Ain't much, but it's something." James stared at the bill, his mind foggy. He'd spent $20 on a single cocktail without blinking, yet this man who had nothing was giving him everything. "Why?" he whispered. Amos shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "'Cause you need it more than me right now. That's how it works." Before James could respond, a coughing fit seized Amos, his frail body shaking. Rusty whimpered, pressing against him. James noticed the old man's thin frame, in the way his hands trembled, not just from cold, but from something deeper, perhaps illness. Guilt gnawed at him, but he was too weak to protest. Amos pointed down the street. "There's a diner 2 blocks over. They're good folks. Might let you clean dishes for a plate. You rest here a bit, then go. I gotta check on some things." With that, he shuffled off, Rusty at his heels, leaving James alone with the coat, the money, and a flicker of hope. James sat there, clutching the 20 like a lifeline. For the first time in years, he felt small, not the titan of industry, but a man stripped bare, dependent on a stranger's kindness. He didn't know it yet, but Amos's act would change him forever. Over the next few days, James survived on the fringes of Astoria. The diner, true to Amos's word, offered him a meal in exchange for washing dishes. He slept in a church basement, where a pastor gave him a blanket and clean clothes. Slowly, his strength returned, but his mind churned. He'd lost his phone, his ID, everything that tethered him to his old life. Yet the absence of those trappings forced him to see the world differently. He thought of Amos constantly. The old man's selflessness haunted him. James had built an empire on calculated moves, always asking, "What's in it for me?" But Amos had given without expectation, asking nothing in return. It was a kind of strength James had never understood. One evening, James returned to the alley, hoping to find Amos. The shelter was empty, the tarp flapping in the wind. A neighbor, a street vendor named Maria, saw him poking around. "You looking for Amos?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "He ain't been around. Heard he's been coughing bad. Probably holed up somewhere quiet." James's heart sank. "Do you know where he might be?" Maria shook her head. "Amos keeps to himself when he's sick, but he's always helping folks, even when he's got nothing. Saved my kid from a bad crowd once, just by talking to him. Good man, that one." James nodded, resolve hardening within him. He had to find Amos, not just to thank him, but to make things right. His old life, with its boardrooms and private jets, felt distant. For the first time, he wanted to give, not take. Part 2. The Debt Repaid. James spent the next week scouring Astoria for Amos. He asked at soup kitchens, checked alleys, and spoke to anyone who might know the old man. His search was fueled by a mix of gratitude and guilt. The $20 was long gone, spent on a bus ticket to a nearby town where he'd managed to contact an old colleague. Within days, his company had wired funds, and James Carver, the CEO, was back, on paper. But the man who'd washed dishes in a diner was still there too, reshaping his priorities. He finally found Amos at a derelict pier, where the old man sat on a bench staring at the river. Rusty lay at his feet, his tail wagging weakly. Amos looked frailer than before, his cough deeper, his eyes sunken. James approached cautiously, his polished shoes out of place on the weathered boards. "Amos?" he called softly. The old man turned, squinting. "James? That you?" A faint smile broke through his fatigue. "Look at you, all cleaned up. Told you that diner'd set you right." James sat beside him, his throat tight. "You saved my life, Amos. That coat, that money, I wouldn't be here without you." Amos waved a hand dismissively. "Just doing what's right. You'd have done the same." "No," James said firmly. "I wouldn't have. Not before. But I want to now." He paused, choosing his words. "I've got money, resources. Let me help you. A place to live. A doctor. Whatever you need." Amos chuckled, then coughed, wincing. "Appreciate it, son. But I'm fine. Me and Rusty, we get by." James leaned forward, earnest. "You're not fine. You're sick, and you deserve better than this." He gestured to the pier, the cold wind cutting through them. "Please, let me do this." Amos studied him, his eyes sharp despite his frailty. "You really mean it, don't you?" "I do," James said, "and I'm not taking no for an answer." Reluctantly, Amos agreed to see a doctor. James arranged an appointment at a local clinic, covering all costs. The diagnosis was grim: advanced pneumonia, compounded by years of malnutrition and exposure. Amos needed rest, medication, and a stable environment, things he'd never had. James rented a small apartment in Astoria, furnished it simply, and moved Amos and Rusty in. He hired a nurse to check on Amos daily, ensuring he took his meds and ate properly. At first, Amos resisted the fuss. "This is too much, James," he'd grumble, sitting in his new armchair with Rusty at his feet. But the warmth of the apartment and the absence of hunger softened his protests. He began to tell James stories of his youth as a fisherman, his lost family, his years on the streets. James listened, realizing how little he'd known about struggle until now. Word of James's actions spread through Astoria. Maria, the street vendor, stopped by with homemade tamales, thanking him for helping Amos. Others followed, locals who'd been touched by Amos's quiet kindness over the years. They brought food, blankets, even toys for Rusty. James saw a community bound by small, selfless acts, so different from the cutthroat world he'd known. Inspired, James went further. He used his company's resources to fund a local shelter, naming it Amos's Haven. It offered beds, meals, and job training for the homeless, with a focus on dignity and hope. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Amos, now stronger, stood beside him, his eyes misty. "Never thought I'd see something like this," he said, gripping James's shoulder. James's transformation didn't stop there. Back in San Francisco, he restructured Carver Innovations, prioritizing ethical AI and community outreach. He launched a program to hire and train people from marginalized backgrounds, remembering Amos's resilience. His board grumbled, but James was unyielding. "This is who we are now," he told them. Months later, James visited Amos in Astoria. The old man was healthier, his cough gone, his spirit brighter. They sat on the pier where they'd reunited, watching the river glint under the sun. Rusty chased seagulls, barking joyfully. "You didn't just give me a home," Amos said, his voice steady. "You gave me a reason to keep going." James smiled, his heart full. "And you gave me a reason to change. That $20 was worth more than my whole company." They sat in companionable silence, the river flowing before them, a reminder of the current that had brought them together and the kindness that had set them both free.